Hello folks, I actually meant to make a different video, but today I feel that I want to talk about a creepy subject. Now what I mean by a creepy subject is I want to talk about a series of dreams I've had about one of my best friends in school. His name was Duncan. Now, the thing with Duncan is I met him in a private school. I went to this public school where all my friends used to go to. And then I heard about another friend that I lost contact from. About 10 years I lost contact with this guy. And I heard that his mother called my mother and she said, like, my boy is in this new private school. And this is how I joined this private school. So we became very good friends again. That friendship lasted for like a year. And in that year's time, I used to go to this library. So school had a very, very full scientific library and encyclopedias and everything, scientific journals, all sorts of journals related to science, engineering, the newest technology and everything. And there was another kid sitting there and he was also in my class. So in total I was in school, adding up all these years, around 2.5 years. I left in the second half of the year I left the school. My parents had to move, but that's another story. So there was always this lonely kid who sat there, and I eventually introduced myself and he told me his name was Duncan. And he also used to study these journals very in-depthly. We always had a whole week that we could take out the books. I remember it like yesterday. So I used to take you could take 2 books out a week. And I always had one copy of electronics books and another copy of like weapons or something else that I was interested in. But I always had a science book. And Duncan always came and get the science books like myself. So we sometimes swapped books and we became friends like that. Within a year and a half of being really good friends, going back and forth, playing games, just enjoying ourselves, I remember that Duncan had some problems socially, so I could always attest to his social awkwardness. He was very good friends with me and another guy, but I personally have attested that he hinted several times that I was his best friend, and I was literally his closest friend that he could discuss anything with. He was a very mature guy, and we all sat. He had this other guy that he knew. The guy was around 29 years of age, and he was, Duncan and him was almost like friends. So he was like a 15-year-old guy who was friends with like a 29-year-old guy, and the 29-year-old, he was like a neighbor to Duncan. So he lived on another like farm, just a kilometer or 2 away from Duncan. And they got to know each other. I think there was like a trading or something that happened, and they got to know each other. So Duncan's father, became friends with this guy, and he also became like friends with Duncan. Like he would give him like all these video games and everything. And I came by his house once, and we talked about science and engineering and everything. And this guy was also very cool. His name was Stuart. And Stuart, I've never heard again from Stuart, but within 2 or 3 years of Duncan not attending school anymore, he eventually gave me his like school clothes. And as he left school, he obviously gave me some of these books as well that I could have used. So after someone leaves school, you don't really catch up with them again. So years went by, and I never really talked to Duncan. So I was kind of really, I was disturbed. I was really concerned about him, because I remember as he went to homeschooling, he went on this American system of homeschooling, where they did very, very advanced algebra and everything. And Duncan would score very good grades. He never had a problem with math and science, but he had a real problem with social interactions. I remember that he had no friends. His sister was quite popular, but he has never been popular. But there was this dream that I've gotten about, I think 2 years after Duncan left school. So I was on my last talk about semesters as a university term. I was on my last term in school, and I had this really vivid dream. I must have been about 14 or 15 years of age, and I dreamt of me and Duncan was at this very, very big house in front of a very large house, and there was this 3 meter tall walls, like taller than us, so we had to climb over these walls, and they were like policemen just left and right of these walls trying to get to us, but we would jump over wall, jump over wall, jump over wall. And there was this old BMW car that my parents used to drive, so we got it from my grandfather. It was like a very classic BMW car, but I just dreamed that the car was next to us, because me and Duncan used to drive into this car a lot. Just with my parents, we used to drive a lot of times in this old BMW. And eventually, jumping over the walls, I saw I was now in front of this house, and me and Duncan we stood facing each other, and we were talking about how we're going to enter this house. And there was 2 doors to this house. There was one on the right and one on the left. And Duncan just unremittingly go to the left side of the door, and he just entered. And I remember I just told him, Duncan, wait, don't enter the door. And I went to the right side of the door, and I entered the door to the right, and there was this large beam of stairs, this very large steep stairs. And I just remember how I sweated and climbed the stairs to the top. And I got to this hallway. And this hallway was almost like a hospital type of hallway, like, white walls and everything, no windows. And there was this maid coming to my left, and this typically in Africa, there's a lot of black people working for white people, like as maids. And she had this like green, hospital color green clothes on, and she asked me if I want a cup of coffee. So I never said no to a cup of coffee, so I said yes. So after my question faded away, I never got the coffee, but I kept going into this hallway, and I noticed all these rooms in this hallway. All these rooms were to the left, and they were like, the walls were white, and there was like rooms after room after room, almost like a dormitory. And there was this one room at the end of this hallway, and it really got my attention. So I entered this room, and as I entered this room, there's all these kids about my age, 14 years old, jumping around. They were really happy about something. And I kind of vibed with them. I jumped around with them, and they were jumping on beds, almost like flying through the air. And as I jumped with them, I felt this extremely euphoric experience as I synced with these kids. I didn't even know them, but I synced with them. The room was like not a very big room. There was like a table. There was double-sized beds. I can remember there was double-sized bed. I remember the kid on the top jumped on his bed, and well, kids were short back then. I remember the kid at the bottom jumped on his bed, and they were kind of flying through the air. But then as I jumped, I noticed there was a more eerie room to the right. There was a kind of sinister feeling about it, a very, very dark, melancholic feeling about it. And I remember I entered this room because I was curious what's going on there. And I remember there was this lady reading a story to a lot of children listening to her. And everyone was undressed in this room. It was dark, but everybody was undressed. And I remember everyone was like, they had nothing on, especially, I can't remember about the lady, but the kids only had their, many times when we went swimming, we had our swim gear on. I remember every one of those kids had their swim gear on, and I had my swim gear on. And they were all sitting cross-legged and listening to this lady talking and discussing a story, but the story was extremely deep. It was almost like a very eerie, sinister type of thing going on, something very sad going on. And I could see these kids, they were just kind of in misery, listening extremely attentively to the story as it's so serious. And I must contrast that this was almost near midnight in the time of this theme of the dream, where at the start it was daylight. It was like in the morning, let's say about 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. And this was around 12 a.m. or 11 p.m. at night. And I remember this moonlight rays shining through one of the side windows, and how the skeleton wars. There was the skeleton, a bunch of skeleton bones and skulls coming together, and it formed a skeleton horse, about my height by then. And this horse started galloping, and I remember how, as it galloped, the moonlight started shining more and more and more. And as it gallops, it came towards me, and the dream just ended. I was extremely shocked as I waked up from this dream. But around, let me just see, I just made annotated notes. I just want to see where I am in the... Around a few years after that, I had another dream of Duncan. I was in Duncan's house. So me and Duncan, I should mention, we immigrated eventually. And we lost contact. Me and Duncan lost contact for a very long time. And I eventually caught up with Duncan. I heard that he had extreme depression. Duncan told me like he has been through a very tough period in his life, and he had extreme depression. But before I talked to him, I had this extreme dream of Duncan, where I was in Duncan's house. The house they were currently living in was a farmhouse, and it was like an hour away from where I lived. And he had this extremely pointy hair. Now Duncan never did anything to his hair. Like he always wore very, very stylish, not very, very stylish, but very basic hairstyle. And in this dream, it was the exact opposite. He had extreme pointy hair, and it was dyed as well. And his parents were extremely worried about him. And I just remember how I gave him advice, but he just didn't want to listen. And his mother started crying. I remember the dream ended there, but I was extremely flabbergasted. I was extremely alienated by this dream, and I just couldn't piece over what's going on. So I just went on with my life, and I eventually lost contact with Duncan. And then obviously I Facebooked him, and I heard that he has been through Great Depression throughout the time that I had the dream. So we ended our chat, and after we talked, I remember Duncan closed his Facebook account. And around a few years after that, I had another very vivid dream of Duncan. So I tried to find Duncan, but I couldn't find him on Facebook, and I just thought that he just deleted his Facebook. But in this dream, I saw Duncan coming to visit me, and I remember that it was this very, very nice house back in my country. So I should mention I'm in Australia, but I used to be in Africa, and this house was back in Africa. So I saw Duncan coming to visit me with his sister and with his mother. There was something very odd. I told Duncan how long ago we saw each other and how happy am I to see him again. But there was this wall between me and him, and I remember as I'm trying to talk to him, I couldn't get through him. I just couldn't get through to him, and his mother started crying, and his sister was extremely unhappy about something. And I remember how I tried to make her feel better, how I tried to tell her everything is okay, and she just kept telling me how things changed. And I talked to Duncan, and we did the things we used to do back when we were children. I remember how we climbed a tree together. I remember how we climbed over this wall again. But there was something very odd about him. I remember there was just something very off, and I couldn't get through to him. He had to leave. I don't know why he had to leave, but his mother just told me that he had to leave now, and unfortunately this is our goodbye. So I greeted Duncan, and it was just a very, very funny dream. I just didn't understand what's going on. So I woke up extremely frightened and sweat in the middle of the night from this dream. And I just decided not to tell my family about this because I didn't want to upset anybody for no reason. I thought it's just a dream, it will go over. For about a week this dream really plagued me, and it just plagued me onwards. But my life went on for another few years. I never could really get in contact with Duncan, but after a while I went back to Facebook and I searched Duncan and his surname, and I found this extremely shocking words, remembering Duncan, and his surname inserted. So there was a Facebook page opened as a remembrance to him, and I found out he died. He died about the same time I had that last dream of him. This was something I still can't figure out what the hell happened. Every time I had a dream about that guy, there was something this dream told me about him that was gonna happen. If I look at the dream themes of every one of these dreams, it was like there was something very odd and eerie about it, that it's almost trying to foretell the future about what's going to happen to Duncan in some way or other. Please leave your thoughts. I would really like to hear it.